오늘 만나볼 분은 하버드 대학의 인류학자인 조셉 헨릭 교수입니다. 조셉 헨릭 교수는 위어드라는 책을 썼는데 이 책은 우리나라에서도 베스트셀러가 됐죠. 이 책은 기본적으로 가치관의 차이와 그 원인을 설명하는 책이에요. 주로 위어드라고 조셉 헨릭 교수가 부르는 서구화된, 공업화된 교육 수준이 높고 소득 수준이 높은 곳에서, 특히 대도시에서 생활하는 사람들과 그렇지 않은 사람들 사이에 상당히 큰 가치관의 차이가 있다라는 것을 설명하고, 그런 가치관의 차이가 어디서 왔는지를 얘기해주는 책입니다. 원래는 그런 목적으로 쓰여진 책이지만 요즘 우리 사회를 보내는 가치관의 차이 때문에 굉장히 많은 싸움들이 있잖아요. 세대갈등이 그 대표적인 예라고 할 수 있겠죠. 그래서 꼭 서구 문명과 비서구 문명의 가치관을 비교하는 것뿐 아니라 여러 다른 세대의 가치관, 또는 도시에 사는 사람들과 농경지대에 사는 사람들의 가치관에 이거를 적용해봐도 재밌을 거라고 생각을 했고요. 어쨌든 조셉 헨릭 교수의 이론을 다른 식으로 적용을 하려면 원래 연구를 했던 박사님이 어떻게 생각하는지를 알면 좋을 것 같다고 생각해서 인터뷰를 해봤습니다. Obviously, your book does explain the difference between the Western culture and the culture in the rest of the world. But for somebody coming from a country that's rapidly westernizing, like South Korea, I thought it was interesting if we apply what's in your book to generational differences here. The difference between the more traditional generation and the younger generation that came up in a more westernized political and educational system. So in 2014, to give you an example, Korean football team went to compete in the World Cup being held in Brazil, and we did really badly. And a lot of the sports experts said that this was due to the football coach who was in his 50s, putting front and center only players he knew personally very, very well. And because the football coach was, of a different generation, obviously the players who were put in front and center were not the young guns that are coming up, but the people that were past their prime. So young people saw a symbol of what's wrong with Korea, why we are not able to join the most developed countries in the world, and made a meme. We called it 의리 축구, 의리 football. 의리 means personal loyalty, personal fealty. 의리 is one of the 6 founding bedrocks of Confucian ethics. So in no case was 의리, personal loyalty, was a bad thing for the older generation. Whereas for the younger generation, it was putting personal relationship before fairness.
So I do field work in a remote part of Fiji in the South Pacific. And there, I was just always impressed by the degree to which everything revolved around your clan and your larger kin group. So for example, we wanted to build a bathroom, a latrine. For various activities like laying the cement and stuff, everybody was like, oh, I got a cousin. So we did everything almost through some kind of kin network. It didn't even seem to occur like, let's weigh the quality differences of these different artisans to see if they're the best person for the job. People automatically thought in terms of their kin network. Americans like to talk about work, right? So the first thing people will often do is talk about what they do. I know that having spent time in other societies, especially Fiji, the first thing you do is try to establish relationships, right? So is there any chance I know someone that you know? And actually, when I began my field work in Fiji, I had met the minister. I went to see her relative, and then I started my field project. And everybody I would meet, I would be like, do you know? And then I would name everybody I know in Fiji, basically. And if we could find a connection, then that was a big bonus.
So in most places, networking would work more similarly as in Korea than in the US.
Yeah, that's the standard human way. What's strange is having these strangers who are just looking for mutual interest, essentially.
That's why you call the Western educated people the weirdest people in the world.
Yeah, a bunch of peculiar cultural traits. Yep.
조셉 헨릭 교수에 의하면 인간은 본능적으로 2개의 상충되는 가치관을 추구하게 되어 있대요. 하나는 개인적 가치관이라고 부르는 의리 같은 거예요. 내 친구, 내 가족에게 충성하고 그들을 돌보고 싶어하는 본능. 또 하나는 비개인적 가치 또는 보편적 가치라고 부르는 건데 공정 같은 거죠. 내 가족이든 먼 사람이든 똑같이 공평하게 돼야 된다라는 생각을 인간이 둘 다 가지고 있다고 합니다. 근데 인류 역사 대부분을 보면은 개인적 가치관, 즉 나랑 가까운 사람을 먼저 챙겨야 된다는 것이 당연시되는 사회가 훨씬 더 많다고 합니다. 그런데 중세기에 종교적 이유로 인해서 서양에서는 이것이 깨지기 시작하면서 가족이든 아니든 똑같이 공정하게 그 사람의 능력과 공헌에 따라서 대해야 된다는 새로운 이데올로기가 떠오르게 되고, 이것이 서구 사회와 비서구 사회의 진정한 차이다라고 얘기를 해요. 서구화가 되고 공업화가 되고 교육 수준도 높아야 되고 소득 수준도 높고 개발 수준도 높은 곳에서 보편적 가치관이 더 중요시되고, 이 보편적 가치관에 어긋나는 것, 즉 여기 능력 있는 사람이 있는데 나랑 관련 없는 사람이 있으면 내 사촌을 먼저 쓰는 것을 비리 또는 부조리로 여기게 된다는 거죠.
Most human societies over the course of history have begun with a basic set of kinship relations and then tried to add on personal relationships built up through their kin networks till you end up with this sort of large extended family, a network of friends and other kinds of relationships where loyalty is at a high premium, respecting the norms of the group, trying to avoid shame, so saving face. Things like that are all the crucial things which lead to success and help the collective prosper. So I think the place to start is we need to recognize that humans are a kind of primate, and like other primates, we have basic instincts about preferentially helping close relatives, kin, children, things like that. And then we also have a pair bonding instinct, like gorillas, which allows us to build long-term pair bonds between males and females for the purposes of rearing offspring. And we also have to avoid incest. So in lots of species, either the males or the females leave to prevent any kind of incestuous relationship resulting in inbreeding problems and whatnot. So if you take those three basic ingredients, you can look at different human societies and see how they've harnessed them in various ways. So first, marriage is built around the pair bonding instinct. Now, pair bonding doesn't mean monogamy. So gorillas, for example, single male gorillas will have multiple female pair bonds. And in lots of human societies back into history, it was common for high status and elite males to have multiple wives, for example. So that immediately gives you lots of half siblings and kind of expands the nature of the family. People also look for ways to extend their family relationships through cousin marriage. So, for example, in lots of societies, you would preferentially marry your father's brother's children or your mother's sister's children. Anthropologists call those parallel cousins. Now, you also have your cross cousins, your father's sister's children and your mother's brother's children. And those are more what you might think of as cousins. And so those are two of the tools. Another one is inheritance. So in lots of societies, it's either patrilineal inheritance, so you get your identity and land and stuff through your father's line, or the mother's line. It's relatively unusual to have bilateral inheritance, where you inherit both identity and land, wealth, other kinds of things through both mom and dad's side. And that diffuses it and prevents you from concentrating kinship in a corporate group. So, I mean, many of those things are, I know just from what I know about Korea, were important. Not too many generations passed in Korea and in lots of places around the world. But that's what got dismantled in Europe during the Middle Ages.
결국 조셉 헨릭 박사에 의하면 이 보편적 가치관이라는 게 만들어진 이유는 가문이 가정이 됐기 때문이다라는 것 같아요. 그러니까 옛날 같은 경우에는 가문의 숫자를 늘리고 가문의 권세를 유지하는 것이 내가 잘 사는 방법이었다는 거예요. 그래서 일부 다처제라든지 사촌혼이라든지 부계사회 같은 제도를 만들어서 이 가문의 유대관계가 끈끈하게 유지되도록 하고 최대한 많은 사촌과 육촌과 팔촌이 한 군데 모여 살아서 이것 자체를 하나의 파워로 삼는 것이 거의 대부분 일반적인 전통사회의 모습이었죠. 옛날에는 어디 누구시 이렇게 자기 정체성을 자기 시족으로 표현하고 사당을 지어놓고 종친회가 모여서 같이 제사를 지내면서 그 유대관계를 돈독하게 하는 모습이 우리나라뿐 아니라 세계 인간사회의 대체적으로 보편적인 모습이었다는 거죠. 하지만 유럽에서는 중세 초기부터 가톨릭 종교에서 사촌혼뿐 아니라 심지어는 14촌까지의 결혼을 금지시키고 일부 다처제 풍습 같은 걸 없애면서 가문이 하나의 조직의 형태를 띠고 있었는데 한 아버지와 한 어머니가 다음 세대를 교육시키는 우리가 아는 핵가족이라는 형태로 분쇄되게 됐다는 거죠.
The most famous one and the best documented one is the bans on cousin marriage, which begins with bans on first cousin marriage and then eventually extends out all the way to six cousins. But they also ban polygyny, they implement bilateral inheritance, so you inherit both from mom and dad. They end levirate and sororal marriage. If your husband dies, you marry his brother. And that keeps the bond between patrilineal groups. That's common in lots of societies. It's common, for example, in the Christian Bible.
So when Henry VIII had his fateful marriage to Catherine of Aragon, does that count as what you describe as levirate marriage?
Yes. So he is marrying his dead brother's wife. So Catherine of Aragon was previously married. And that is one of the things that Henry uses to get out of his marriage. So they use that eventually to justify his ability to get rid of her as a wife and take another wife. But I think that Henry VIII is a great example because any self-respecting king or emperor in Asia or Africa would have not had that argument. They would have just added all those wives. Henry would have had 8 wives. And, there wouldn't have been any of the head chopping off bit. But because he had to toe the line with the Pope and whatnot, he had to figure out a way to divorce each wife and take on a new wife.
So if you look at the emperors and, for example, the great kings in Polynesia with their 5,000 wives or 10,000 wives, I don't know if they actually had 10,000 wives, but so the story goes, compared to King of England, one of the most powerful people in Europe, still having to wrestle with the Roman Curia to even get approval for divorce. That shows the difference between attitude toward marriage between different cultural zones.
Right. It shows how strong the marriage and family program is, because almost everywhere else in the world, it's not only okay to have additional wives and concubines, but it's kind of a symbol of your status and power. And in lots of places, China among them, you would have different levels of wives. Like you'd have your main wives, which would be like other elite females from other ruling families. But then you'd have another whole level all the way down to a harem of concubines. Like you said, the numbers get pretty big. William the Conqueror. So this is the sort of Viking descendant in France who eventually conquers England. He gets threatened with excommunication by the Pope, and he has to say how sorry he was for marrying his cousins, and he builds an abbey as a kind of make nice contribution. So the Pope is kind of wrestling with the elites and trying to do this. Eventually, the Catholic Church allows people to buy dispensations to marry their cousins. So this creates a revenue stream for the church. And it also allows people with enough money to marry a certain range of cousins. You still couldn't marry your first cousins, but you could maybe marry your second and third cousins if you had enough money. And so the argument is that what this does is it breaks some European communities down into mostly monogamous nuclear families. And that means that's actually pretty devastating, right? Because that means that your basis for production, distribution, the people who care for you in old age, those things are dissolving. The first thing Europeans do is they begin investing more in the church and in the religious stuff. And within that, they build these self-help communities, monasteries begin spreading, and eventually you get charter towns where people opt in as individual citizens. And then they got to decide how to govern themselves, so they start building representative institutions because they can't use all the kinship structures and the lineages that are common in lots of societies.
그래서 가문이 가정이 되면 어떤 일이 일어나냐? 갑자기 옆에 둘러보니까 나를 도와줄 수 있는 대가족 숫자가 너무 적은 거예요. 대가족끼리 모여가지고 민병대를 조직할 수도 없고 가족들끼리만 모여가지고 생산 활동을 할 수가 없게 됐다는 거죠. 그러다 보니까 유럽에서는 서로 모르는 사람들이 모여서 협동조합을 만들거나 공동조직을 만들 필요가 생겼고, 이런 것들이 유럽 역사에 보면은 아시아에는 없는 헌장도시라든지 대학조합이라든지 이런 형태로 나타나게 된대요. 유럽에서 가장 먼저 발달하게 된 게 계약법이라고 합니다. 서로 모르는 사람이 만나서도 사기를 치지 않고 거래를 할 수 있어야만 핵가족으로 분쇄한 사회는 돌아갈 수가 있었다는 거죠.
And one of the amazing things is that when you look across space and time and you see a big trading network, you might think, well, they're trading the same way we do in the modern world. No, no, no. They've built some kind of interconnected network where two individuals who don't know each other may trade, but they have a bunch of links between them. And so if anything ever went wrong, you could tell your father-in-law, who would tell someone else, who that guy would get in trouble if he screwed you over, right? So it depends on these personal relationships, not on legal contracts. In the world of intensive kinship, your health and your survival is closely tied to this network. So the crucial values that get inculcated into people that we internalize are some of the things we mentioned. So, loyalty to friends and family, following the norms that keep the group going and whatnot, and giving preferential attention. So you have lots of trust, but it's only trust within this group. As soon as you leave that group, there's nothing to maintain the trust because you don't have the network connections that would normally do it. And the transition is to a world of individuals who get together in opportunities for mutual benefit. And what people are looking for there is people who they can trust across whatever it is they're doing. So you go from a more relational kind of morality to an impersonal morality where you're treated as a role. So rather than, dealing with your friends in, say, a transaction of trade, you're just dealing with a person in the role of customer or in the role of store owner or things like that. You get the beginning of the development of contract law in Europe, even though places in Asia are far ahead of the Europeans in lots of legal and philosophical areas. Where the Europeans start making a lot of developments is in commercial law and contract law, things where you have to regulate the interaction among strangers who have no connections to larger groups like clans or tribes or anything like that.
Some of what we've said, because of these particular restrictions on marriage that Catholic Church placed on European society, kinship relationship erodes. So people have less cousins effectively to go to if they have a problem. They can't just gather their cousins to defend themselves against invaders because the number of cousins become effectively less. And that's why, as you say in your book, the Western society became very good at, how do you put it, voluntary association and impersonal pro-sociality.
So impersonal prosociality is that set of norms that specify how you're supposed to treat someone you don't have any kind of relationship. So assume you know nothing about someone. How are you going to treat them? So this is really important to make markets function, but also institutions where you don't know everybody well. Are you going to assume people are going to cooperate? And are you going to cooperate? And are you going to behave fairly? And if people have sufficiently strong market norms, these cooperative norms, then you can make commerce really go because you can go to the best person. If people are going to cheat you, then you're going to want to go to the person who you know the best because there you're not going to get cheated. But as soon as you can trust people, then you can begin to compare. I'm going to go to the person with the best quality product. So that's impersonal prosociality, a set of norms about how you interact with strangers who you don't know. Then the question was these impersonal institutions, voluntary institutions. So these can be anything. So an important one in Europe was the charter town. So here, you get dukes and kings and stuff who wanted to start a town. These were potentially sources of revenue, but you had to recruit. You want a good blacksmith and you want some carpenters and you need some merchants. And so you want to recruit all these different individuals. And rather than getting like a whole clan to move, you would recruit individuals and you might go to other towns and find out who the best blacksmith is and try to get him to move to your town and set up shop. So these are voluntary groups where you would get some benefits from being in the group, but then you had to sign on to be, if the community needed defense, you might have to pay some taxes for public goods and bridges and things like that. So you would get citizens' rights in exchange for some benefits. Then we see them popping up in lots of forms. So there's the towns, universities begin around this time in Europe, and this is either a labor union for teachers or a bunch of students who are pulling together to hire their teachers. These are not people who know each other. And then eventually you get business corporations and things like that.
I think when Korean people try to understand even the nature of a country like the United States of America, it's very confusing because most East Asian countries consider ourselves an extended blood group. Even the word itself for a country in Chinese, Japanese, and Korean has the Chinese particle for family, ka, in it. So basically, to any Japanese, Korean, or Chinese person, we are probably more blood related than with people from other countries. And that's how we define ourselves. And then they travel to the US and they see people from different countries and different origins, all living
That's
together,
exactly right.
calling themselves
And that's because
Americans.
the US is built on the model of the voluntary association, right?
So it's anybody, basically the concept is that anybody that agrees to the Constitution, right? That's why you do the oath when you become a citizen.
So you're joining and you're getting a bunch of responsibilities, like you have to pay taxes, and you get the rights and privileges that come with citizenship. The US model wasn't, it was pioneering and novel, but the pieces that go into the United States Constitution, the basic concept, go all the way back into medieval Europe. So there were small charter towns in Germany and Switzerland and Italy and other places, in England, where you would join the town and you would get some rights and privileges, but then there'd also be costs. And in principle, anybody can join. You kind of had to be a Christian back then, but they would make a special area for the Jews. So that was the idea.
Another difference I noticed between the Western approach and Eastern approach to life was, I had a friend when I was in college who was really into like yoga. And he went to ashram in India for a couple of months. And, his room was basically made out like an Indian ashram. He drank chai every morning. It almost seemed to me like Americans consider our culture like something you can pick and choose.
I like kayaking, for example. And, that's a technology that Arctic foragers use to hunt caribou. But now it's a thing, right?
Oh, well, I didn't know that. That actually is a Northern Native American practice.
The first kayaks were encountered when European explorers began going around the Arctic, and they found these amazing boats, essentially, that people would use for hunting. One thing I talk about in the book is conformity, right? And so, all humans are somewhat conformist, but Americans in particular are one of the least conformist groups around. We're also big on individualism. So the more individualistic you are, the more you're looking to set yourself apart from others. And most people can't come up with something completely new. That's almost unheard of. But what you can do is take something from here, and something from here, and then you have something that nobody else has. So that helps distinguish you, makes you unique amongst others, and then possibly makes you more interesting as a friend, as a marriage partner, in your professional circles, that sort of thing. So if you're born into a world of intensive kinship, a lot of your relationships are already prescribed. And as you suggested that in Korea, if you're looking for a business partner, you're kind of working through your social networks to see, what your closest link is to people who might be able to complement your interests or help you with your business interests. In a world of kind of anonymous strangers where people are individualists, you're looking for business partners, friends, mates who have something to offer, right? Something maybe that's different from you or different from all the other choices, or at least makes them stand out. So this diversity can be a strength, or at least people look upon it as a strength.
근데 이걸 우리나라 세대 갈등에 제가 적용을 해보니까 상당히 흥미로운 인사이트를 몇 가지 얻을 수가 있었어요. 첫 번째는 이제 우리나라의 여러 외로움이라든지 결혼이나 연애를 하지 않고 심지어는 친구도 잘 만나지 않는 현상에 관련해서 이해를 할 수가 있었던 것 같아요. 일단 우리나라는 옛날 시족 단위, 즉 나랑 혈연이나 지연관계가 있는 사람이랑 친하게 지내는 게 당연한 사회였어요. 그리고 조셉 헨릭 교수가 피지에 대해서 말한 것처럼 누군가를 만나면은 나에 대해서 이야기를 하는 것보다 혹시 대학 어디 나왔어요? 내 사촌도 거기 대학 나왔는데 알아요? 이런 식으로 인터랙션을 하는 게 굉장히 익숙한 사회였습니다. 근데 요즘은 그런 질문을 하는 게 예의가 없다라고 얘기를 할 정도로 혈연 지연에 따라서 인맥을 형성하는 것을 타부시하는 사회가 됐는데, 그렇다고 해서 중세기부터 대가족과 혈연 지연이 깨진 유럽처럼 임퍼스널 프로소셜리티, 아무한테나 갑자기 불쑥 가가지고 뭐 하는 사람이냐고 물어보고 악수하고 웃고 떠들고 친구가 되는 그런 소셜 스킬이 있느냐, 그러면 그러기에는 너무 혈연 관계가 빨리 깨졌죠. 그러다 보니까 혈연 지연을 기반으로 한 관계도 불편하고, 그렇다고 갑자기 엘리베이터에서 이웃을 만나서 오늘 술 한잔 합시다 라고 얘기하기도 어려운 그런 상태에 살고 있는 사람들의 고충을 젊은 세대들이 더 많이 스트레스를 받고 있는 것 같아요. 이 혈연 관계가 깨지다 보니까 지금까지 조셉 헨릭 교수님이 말씀하신 혈연 관계가 돈독한 사회의 가치관, 즉 팔은 안으로 굽는다, 내 자식 먼저, 또는 내가 아는 사람에게 기회를 줘야 되고 내 후배들을 챙긴다, 이런 윗세대의 가치관, 즉 기본적으로 의리에 기반을 하고 있는 가치관이 조금 더 보편적 가치관, 즉 모든 사람은 다 공평하고 능력과 자기가 노력한 만큼 얻어야 된다는 가치관과 충돌을 하게 되면서 어떻게 보면은 이제 우리나라에서도 위얼드한 사람들과 위얼드하지 않은 사람들이 한 나라에 같이 살면서 이런저런 여러 가지 사회 갈등이 빚어진다라고도 우리나라의 여러 갈등을 이해할 수 있을 것 같습니다.
After reading through your book, this got me a little depressed in a way. Because of the Western education and institutions, the kinship network in Korea has broken down in like record speed. So Korea has one of the lowest marriage rates anywhere in the world. The way it happened was the older generation wanted marriage to be alliance between families. The young generation wanted it to be an individual choice. They couldn't compromise, so young people decided to protest their discontent by simply not marrying and not having children. So this is not unique to Korea. In Japan, for example, there is a phenomenon called hikikomori, where a person will just not leave home and refuse all social contact because every time he engages in social contact, he had the experience of being sort of swept up in a network of social obligation that he didn't volunteer for. And if his education was Western and he was led to believe that he would be treated according to his expectations and his merit, and that's not what happens in society, they get so disenchanted by the actual society around them. They just stay in their apartment, play video games all day, refuse to marry, refuse to have children, refuse to see their family. And this has been a huge social problem in Japan as well.
Well, so the sort of big picture that I paint in Weirdest People in the World in a section called Globalization and Its Discontents is that part of the society, and I don't know the Korean case, so you tell me if you think this fits, it sounds like it does, is that the higher level institutions, so government, how companies work, economic production, have adopted these impersonal institutions that have been copied and refined from other parts of the world. But at some level, at the level of families and family expectations and whatnot, there's still a lot of traditional social norms and traditional society. And those things are clashing. And the young people are kind of, marriage seems to want to be run by the old system, but that doesn't really fit with the new system. The nature of relationships seems to be want to run by the old system versus the new system. So there's a clash.
I was in the Middle East last month, and I found that a lot of young Arab women were really into Korean TV shows, which I didn't know. So when I came back, I went into my Netflix and started looking at some Saudi TV shows and, trying to locate some of the similarities. Because Saudi is also just opening up to Western culture, a lot of the themes in Saudi drama are young person, usually a woman, who's trying to make an individualist decision about her marriage Whereas precisely as you were saying that the parents were trying to marry her to one of the cousins. Whereas cousin marriage was not very common in Korea. If you look at Korean TV shows, not so much now because we've entered a phase in Korean society where people are not marrying and not having children. But if you look at Korean drama that's popular in Saudi Arabia now, which were produced 10 years ago, we also had a lot of drama dealing with the young people trying to find mates on their own, whereas the parents are trying to pair them with somebody that their family is friends with.
The point is that it takes a long time to transform the family. I mean, we don't know where the future's going, but probably the social structure is going to transform, meaning the family system. But I mean, in the process, low birth rates, low marriage rates, unhappiness and whatnot. So I guess the question is what kind of social policies would minimize the sort of pain that people feel during any kind of transition process? Without using like a heavy top-down approach, the only thing that comes to my mind would be to try to create voluntary associations, social clubs essentially, that would attract people who don't know each other and be willing to, within this sphere, engage in, free-flowing interactions among strangers, with the idea that, this could spread, people could enjoy it, and they, might bring their friends and that sort of thing. Just anything to encourage the kind of free-flowing interaction, which would allow you to, I mean, basically humans want to have social relationships, right? That's what makes you happy, whether it's relationships with your family, a rich group of friends, romantic relationships, all those kinds of things seem to be the biggest single factors in people feeling happy. So you got to figure out how in this changing world you're going to make human contact and create the kinds of relationships that people desire.
조셉 헨릭 박사님은 자꾸 이제 한국의 문제에 대해서 해결책을 내면 어떤 걸 낼 것 같냐라고 물어보니까 이제 그러면 그냥 동아리라도 만들어서 강제로라도 모르는 사람끼리 노는 습관을 어렸을 때부터 키워야 되지 않을까라고 조금 마지못해 얘기를 하셨거든요. 근데 제가 생각할 때 이거 굉장히 중요한 인사이트 같아요. 지금 우리나라가 겪고 있는 여러 저출산이라든지 연애를 안 하는 문화라든지 우울증 이런 문제들이 사실 인간관계의 부식에서 나왔다는 건 누구나 알고 있어요. 근데 옛날처럼 혈연, 지연, 학연에 의한 네트워크를 다시 구성할 거냐라고 하면 이미 우리의 사회 시스템과 교육 시스템이 위어드한 방향으로 바뀌었기 때문에 그거를 다시 만드는 건 불가능하다고 치면은 우리가 길러야 되는 건 무엇이냐? 임퍼스널 프로소셜리티. 이웃 사람이 그냥 지나가면 모르는 사람이라도 안녕하세요, 좋은 날이죠 라고 할 수 있는 그 능력. 그리고 볼런터리 어소시에이션. 내가 스키를 좋아하면은 내 주변에서 스키 좋아하는 사람, 우리 사촌이 좋아하나 이게 아니라 그냥 아무데나 스키 좋아하는 사람 만나요 하고 만나서 3, 4개월이 되면 그 사람이 형제처럼 친하게 지낼 수 있는 이런 능력이 발달해야만 우리나라를 괴롭히고 있는 여러 가지 정신적 문제가 풀리지 않을까 생각해서 오늘 이 책 한번 소개해봤습니다. 오늘 조승연의 탐구생활은 여기서 마무리하고요. 다음번에는 더 재밌는 문화 역사 이야기로 찾아뵙겠습니다. 안녕히 계십시오.